Hi, I'm Amanda, and this is the Expressway Tour Online Edition. In this session, you'll learn about design concepts that are vital to developers, plus how DevExpress incorporates these design considerations in order to assist web developers with the design process. First, we'll take a look at these key design concepts from a presentation Mark Miller recently gave for customers on the Microsoft campus in Washington.
Back in 2003, I got an email from someone that said, hey, I got this document, it's in this Microsoft thing called Publisher. Can you open it up? And I said, oh, just a minute, let me check. So I open up this, I go into Microsoft Office, and I scroll down over here, and I see Microsoft, 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 and I go, oh, okay. Let me go to the end, I'm looking for Power Publisher, Publisher. Oh, it's all 2003. So I say, okay, go to the middle. And now I tell myself, keep your eyes, Mark, right down this middle line. Don't get distracted, because I'm easily distracted by pretty icons and things like that, right? Look for the letter P, look for the letter B, oh, PowerPoint, no. Publisher. And then I'm like, remember that icon, remember that icon, remember that icon. Right, because I never want to do this again. And then I did this. I changed Microsoft Office to regular Office, because I know what version of Office I have. I don't have Scooby-Doo Office, I only have Microsoft Office. Right? I got rid of the word Microsoft in the 2003. For me, this was perfect. It's simple, it's clarity. Right? I got rid of the noise. For a guy at Microsoft doing tech support, maybe not so good, because maybe he wants to make sure I'm in the right version, whatever. But I'm telling you, for me, that one was perfect for me. Simpler, it's less noise. Here's an example from an app on the iPhone. Here's the description. I'm like, why do they have an image behind all this text? It makes the text harder to read. It's an example of noise. It's not helpful. So I took a picture, it's in my session. I love this one, holy crap. This is from a game, a real popular game called Cut the Rope. And look at what they've done. You can't scroll this thing either, by the way. I'm pretty sure you can't, or if you can, I have to double check that. I may be wrong on that. Yeah, you can't scroll this. So I don't even know what this is actually. This part right up here by whatever, this is like looks like the terms of use right here. But they've got a white background with white text on top of it, is what they have, right? Makes it harder to read. This is older software, as you can tell by the icons, but holy cow, I saw this and I was like, yeah, that's lovely. So they're thinking, hey, it's check writing software, let's make it look like we're gold. And so they've got, this background, they've got these, strong highlighted edges. This is where your eyes are going, has nothing to do with the data. By the way, you can use these techniques if you ever have to make a presentation and you don't want people to look at information on screen. Like say there was, information that was like embarrassing or whatever, but you had to legally present it, whatever. You can use the opposite of everything I'm saying in here to get away with showing people things you don't want to show them. I have no judgment on it either way. So, okay, can we see this here or not? Let's zoom in. This is from I took this screenshot just in the last month. Look at what they've done here. This is Citibank. So this information is super important, so they put diagonal lines right behind the text, which makes the text harder to read. Can you see those from back there, those diagonal lines? So this is on a website right now on Citibank. If you go to Citibank right now, you'll see this. I was like, what? What are you thinking? Right? It has no functional purpose, right? And it actually detracts from readability. What am I doing? Okay. There we go. This is in an elevator. So here I have, like I say, I'm like, I'm often in an elevator saying, "Baby, stand back. I need to take a picture of this," right? So here we've got a mirrored surface, mirrored buttons, and mirrored numbers, right? It's reflecting everything in the elevator. The only person who really has advantage here is probably the blind guy, right? Who can come in here and just like, okay, I know the button. Meanwhile, I'm like mesmerized by the gold wavy colors. Okay, here's an example of noise. Again, a lot of text being thrown at you. This was a few years ago. I'm using this software with my 5-year-old son on my lap, and this pops up, and I say, take him off the lap. Sorry, son, Dad's got to go to work now, right? And so I take a screenshot, and this is like a little bit crazy. This whole thing, this whole UI. A couple things. One is when it says, where is it? Right here. Click here if you don't want to see this tip again. Boy, I was clicking this thing like crazy for a long time. It turns out this is just a bitmap and it's a picture representing the icon up there. Okay? So we got we'll talk about proximity later, but boy, this is far away from that thing. And it looks like a button, but it's not. Click, 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 click. These two are also not buttons. They're describing the state of there's some piece over here. They look like buttons, but they're not. This is the mouse pointer. And if the text is so important, why is it black on gray instead of black on white, something with higher contrast? Yeah, what do we do when we see a lot of text? We click I agree. That's what we do, right? That's what we do. All right, so here, question, noise. Where's the signal? Again, I'm driving with my family. My family loves me by now, right? I'm like, stop the car. I'm getting out to take a picture right now, right? Where is the signal? The signal is right down there. Do you see that? Bridge out. Oh, you got my attention. Fewer words. I'm with you. Bridge is out. I'm not going there. Okay, contrast. Our eyes are attracted to great contrast. And we talked about information relevance before, right? We said everything on screen is information. Some is more important than others. So contrast should fit information relevance. That means important information should be high contrast and less relevant details should be lower contrast. Here's the opposite of that, in effect, in Norton Ghost. I'm going to install it, and when I hover over the option I want to install, it actually drops contrast down. Maybe I'm just now thinking maybe it's a play on the ghost thing. They're saying, ooh, we're going to make it ghost-like and ethereal and transparent. But it actually lowers the contrast of the more important item that you're looking at instead of increasing it. It's the opposite of what you should be doing. I want to actually go into this in more detail, is what I want to do. And I'm going to do some little improv demos here. Let's start in Word. And let's come in here and let's create a new table. And here's an example in Word where I have some data, and like that, and I have some lines. And what's going on here, we'll just put in some data. There's my data. So I know A is repeating all over, but pretend it's really important, valuable data, okay? So if we zoom in on this, we can see that the thickness of the line is equivalent to the thickness of the border, is the same thickness as the stroke in the font. It's also the same color, okay? So what is this saying? It's saying that the contrast, the importance of this information matches the importance of that information. That is incorrect. It's not actually, that's not actually true. If I go into, let's see here, what's interesting? I guess we do this, because we've got the A's here. Wait, let me do this instead. Where's my zoom level? I want to get it to 100%. All right, so we zoom in here, and we can see what's going on here. Here we have the same width, but the contrast on this is much further reduced. This information is much less important than the data. And this is the right way of doing it. I want to get the Excel team over to the Word team so they can show them some of these things, because the Excel team is, I don't know if this is good for me or bad for me to actually be, this polarizing. Like, does the Word team like travel like in a gang kind of thing? Are they going to be outside wearing jackets, Word let them in jackets? So you're talking about our software, Miller? We're going to get you. No, I don't know. I should not improv and just stay being a software developer. Anyway, so this is an example of contrast. And in the back of my mind, there's this additional thing that I'm thinking, should I tell them that or not? Should I tell them that or not? And I'll say it. It's kind of like, I don't have a demo for it, but the idea goes like this. I said that contrast and emphasis should match information relevance. What happens if you have like 256 different levels of information relevance? Do you have 256 different levels of contrast? The answer is no, because the human being can really only differentiate from I think something like 7 shades of gray or something like that, right? I wanted to create another version of this talk called 5 Shades of Gray, but nobody likes that idea. Nobody likes that title. So anyway, but the idea is that there's a granularity that couples with the rule, right? So the rule says match emphasis to information relevance, and there's a granularity constraint that connects into that rule that says, hey, let's like have 3 or 4 levels. I like 3, right? So you have important information, and you have less important information like lines. You have very important information here, and maybe one more level. And maybe if you want to highlight, you maybe do something else like modify saturation or something like that. But you want to constrain with granularity. Okay, you want to constrain, because otherwise you have noise. And humans cannot visually differentiate very closely matching colors or shades of gray. Yeah?
So on the contrast, what do you think about, like, for example, I remember, you know, when they used to have the paper with the different color lines, like, you know, with green and white, so that if you're reading along the line, you can kind of follow all the data that goes along that line pretty quickly based off of the shade.
Yep.
But then now, if you do that in the software on the screen, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because now you're adding information that maybe isn't relevant to the importance of the information, but you're helping them to group the information.
Yeah. So okay, so the question started with, and I know a lot of you probably heard it, but I have to repeat it for the folks who maybe didn't right there. So the question starts with, you know, I remember in the old days when I printed something out on paper, I'd have like green and white lines, right, that were on those printouts. And then, you know, how does that apply to software? Does it make sense to do that as well? Because I can see there are benefits of getting your eyes to, you know, maybe connect pieces or group pieces that are related, but also it feels like maybe I'm adding too much, or maybe I might be adding too much. And so that's the question. The answer, you know, first of all, I will tell you, we're going to see a slide that looks like this later on. So we're kind of previewing it later on section. But I believe I have the answer. And the answer kind of goes like this. If the eyes have to travel some distance, right? Some, you know, I don't know what we want to call this. Call this maybe 10 degrees, right? Or something like that. Maybe even less, right? They have to travel like actually from here to here. So what is that? That's like about, I don't know, what is that? Yeah, so it's about 15 degrees. So even that, so if I'm holding a phone up and I'm looking left to right, it looks like about 10 degrees, somewhere between 8 and 15 degrees. So if the eyes have to travel that far, and there's nothing else above or below to help guide you, then yes, you need something there. But it can be subtle. You can lower that contrast back so they almost don't even notice it. iPhone does this in a clever way in their settings. Inside their settings, I'm wondering if I can get that screenshot over to myself here and then show everybody. Yeah, I'll take a picture of it and I'll email it. Maybe we'll take a break here in a bit and I'll put that up so you can see it. But yeah, you can do it in a clever way, and again, it really just has to do with contrast. You just drop the contrast back. There used to be, you know, in the old days, like 5+ years ago, a situation where the monitor capabilities would be would vary widely. So my monitor might be able to, the monitor you develop on, an LCD monitor, might be able to show contrast really well, whereas a projector might not, for example. Okay? And so you might have colors that are very close together, but different enough that you can see them on your screen, and then when they're projected or when they're put on a really crappy display, it's white on white. You can't see it. Okay? And so in the old days, what I would tell people is I would say, well, look, you want to go to something called smallest effective difference. What is the smallest difference that's effective? And then, because we're living in a world where, you know, your display is probably better than everybody else's, what you want to do is you want to then increase contrast a bit, like about 10% or something. Just increase contrast so that it'll work on everybody's machine and test it on crappy machines as well. Okay? All right, color. So color is super interesting to me. It's a really interesting topic. These are examples of what of some screenshots I like. The one on the right is, I think, from PowerPoint, and it's using only, all of these are essentially, this is only using one shade of blue, and this is only, or one hue of blue rather, and this is only using one hue of blue. So it's essentially using one hue, and it's varying saturation or brightness, and or both, to get this look. And so what that does is that gives you, when your eye looks at this, instead of seeing all these different colors and trying to figure out does color mean anything here, instead you realize that shape is what you're meant to parse. And so you realize shape is important on this side over here, which I like. Yeah, color is a lot like, you know, throwing a lot of data. If you throw a lot of colors at people, it's like you're throwing a lot of noise. And people, we want to infer meaning from what we see. So if we see a lot of colors, we're like, oh, okay, what's it mean? Okay? Which brings me to colorblind users. These are the numbers here. Notice that women are very lucky in this area. Very few women, percentage-wise, are colorblind, whereas men, I don't know, have a much larger percentage of it. These are the different kinds of color blindness that are out there. You've got L-cone defect, M-cone defect, S-cone defect. And my understanding is that you can actually have combinations of these as well. But for these 3 defects, this is what the colors look like. So for anybody who is colorblind, this slide will be less meaningful to you. But for anybody who has full vision, this gives you an idea of what these colors look like for the different folks that have different kinds of color blindness. Now, let's look at just the red and the green. If we look at the red and the green, and underneath the M-cone defect, this 3rd column over, you see that red and green look pretty close to each other, right? And you can imagine, you could probably find shades of red and shades of green that'll look exactly alike to somebody with an M-cone defect, which is the largest percentage out of the individual defects. Also under L-cone, you can imagine there, so if I had a light red and a dark green, that they would probably look very, very similar to each other. Now let's look at the red and blue. Across the board, for every single of those defects, red and blue are easy to differentiate. The takeaway, ding, use red and blue to differentiate and avoid red and green. The thing is, we commonly use red and green to differentiate, right? Green means, good stocks are going up, red means they're going down. I see red and green used all the time. Use red and blue instead. In fact, you see it on the slide. See men and women up at the top? I'm differentiating with color. Okay? Tips for working with color. So I suggest if you are, designing your own interfaces, you're picking colors, what I recommend you do, if you've got this color dialog up, you work with this part, hue, saturation, and luminance, or lightness, and you avoid red, green, and blue. What this allows you to do is pick a hue, and then change saturation or luminance as needed to get other colors so it looks just like those dialogues that I showed at the beginning, the one from iTunes Install and the one from PowerPoint. If you need help coming up with a creative color palette, you can go to kuler.adobe.com. They have a neat tool that allows you to select from a number of different rules and then create a color palette based on those rules. You can also look at their most popular color palettes. Although the caveat here is that I believe the ones that are the most popular is a combination of the name of the palette combined with the actual colors, not because the colors are actually the most pleasing. Right? They might have like beach sunset or something like that. And so everybody's like, ooh, that is like a beach sunset. Let's vote it up. So use saturation like contrast. This is a color tip. Relevant information can have more relevant information can have a higher saturation. So I could, for example, highlight something in blue or maybe red, although if you highlight in red to some folks it looks black. Right, some of the colorblind folks. But you can highlight with color. And then if you have UI that allows customers to pick colors, the other suggestion is offer fewer color choices. So here, this is, I don't know which, this must be from PowerPoint, I guess, this screenshot right here. I was going to say, I don't know which Office tool this is from, but here's an example where fewer color choices are being offered. And it's nice, right? You just bring it up and you're saying, okay, I can select the color, the essence of the color I want. How are you doing, Paul? Are you okay? You good? All right. So if you want fewer orders, you can highlight with color so that they hit that cancel button more often. Or if you want more orders, you can say, do that, confirm order like that. And then you make the other one, cancel. Although I saw something on Stack Exchange. I like the UI at Stack Exchange, if you've seen that site. And what they did, instead of, and this was for when I edited my answer, they were like, confirm answer. And then here, they had just a link, a hyperlink that said cancel. So it's a very small hyperlink, which I like that. It wasn't a big fat button. So the big fat high contrast button, the path you want me to take is there, and the other one's a link to get me out of it. So here is a chart that showed up in, what is it? I want to say some major newspaper in New York. And this is showing me territories for Obama and territories for Romney. And I'm sure that the design, when they came up with it, looked great. But they weren't realizing that they were going to be printing in black and white at the time. This is what the design, the same image looked like from their website. So this is an example where I guess maybe this applies to nobody in this room. I'm just now realizing, but it's a good thing to be aware of your medium, right? If you're going to use it, well, I don't know, maybe it is. If people are going to print things out, that sort of thing, make sure that if it goes black and white, that it still is easily somehow differentiable. There's one other thing in here. Guess I'll talk about it. So notice down here we have a legend, Obama and Romney. There's blue and there's red there. And up here we have a legend. And what's interesting, at first you're like, wait, what's going on? The blue means it's Rhode Island, you know, or oh wait, this means they couldn't, you know, they couldn't fit the letters in the small states, right? And that's what's going on here. But they're using the same icon as they are down here. Right? What would be better is maybe just pointing in or using some different shape, because when you first look at it, you're like, wait, I've got two different legends and it's a little bit confusing. So even in color, it needs a little bit of help.
Why did they have the icon to begin with? Because it's all blue.
Yeah, you're right. You just point out there, it's just all blue.
And not identifying the letters for any of the other states in.
Yeah. So, all right, size. So size is another thing that you can do for emphasis, right? You can make it bigger to emphasize. You can also combine large size with low contrast to attract the eye and let it move on. Mind experiment, as we're doing on this slide. So notice the title up at the top. It's nice and big, but the contrast is lower than the rest of the text below. So I can get my eyes in and then move down. I like doing this, by the way, for tabular data, for headers on tables. So if I have headers across the top, I like making them bold, so I'm increasing size a little bit, but lowering their contrast. So one, they're easy to see and read the first time I need to see them, and then from that point forward, they're not just fighting with the rest of the data, because they're not as important as the rest of the data. Okay? Headers across the top, bold, lower contrast. Sometimes I'll even do it in color. I'll make it a low saturated blue or something like that. Here's some good examples of size. These are all from Microsoft products. Where they take the button that you're more likely to hit more often and they make it bigger, right? And this probably came out of user testing is my guess, right? That after a lot of user testing, you know, somebody starts scratching their head and thinking, wait a second, they're hitting this button a lot. And they're struggling to find it or whatever, right? They're you know, let's make it bigger and easier. And then they made the change and everybody's like, yep, they're working faster now, right? Buttons that are more frequently hit, go ahead and make them bigger, right? So, you know, all of these thought experiments, right? You can determine that, oh, of course I can't hit this button without hitting this once, so I'm going to hit this at least as many times as that, if not more, right? So all these, same thing with paste, and then send is pretty obvious too. Okay, so another example, confirm, order, cancel. This is very similar to the size, the size differences I was talking about on Stack Exchange, where there's a big fat button and then a small little link next to it to cancel. All right, this is on my flight over, Southwest Airlines. So I want to get Wi-Fi. What do I click? Well, it must be this big yellow button, right? Boom, 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 boom. I really want Wi-Fi. It's only $5. Boom. Come on, Southwest. Where's my Wi-Fi? I need to click harder. Boom, 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 boom. Oh, it's this little white on yellow link. That's it? You give me this big giant thing that looks like a button and you make me click there? Oh my gosh. So that's an example of color, contrast, size, and shape in a bad direction, right? The redesign would make that whole yellow thing a button, right? In fact, why not make the whole banner a button? You want people, this is the only reason you're here is for Wi-Fi, I think, right? Boom, let's get me in there. Okay, motion and animation. So I say smallest effective difference rules apply here. And what I mean by that is, you know, if you're going to have animation, let's have it be the smallest amount of animation that is effective. Okay? Acceleration and deceleration are both good because they look natural. Right? The way we move using acceleration and deceleration all the time. If we want to do the robot dance, we stop that, right? Jung, jung, like that, right? So we do this all the time, so if we're going to move something across the screen, let it have acceleration and deceleration. And then you can also animate an appearance without motion just by fading in and out. I'll show you a demo of animation that's kind of cool. Let's see here if I can, probably in here is going to be a good place. Okay. Let me zoom out just a little bit so we can see all the code. So this is a feature called Reorder Parameters that we built. And so, we're talking about a lot of things, right? And you're seeing a lot of the concepts being used right here in this UI. One is, I don't have a dialog that pops up that hides the code, right? There's no modal dialog, it's flat, right? This kind of also goes to what you were talking about before. What happened if I, flatten everything? It's going to be noisy, but this UI only shows up when you need it, right? We're still kind of entering a modal state, but it's still, everything is flat. I do have discoverability for the keys that you can press right here in the bottom right. In fact, we'll talk about this later, about how that was designed. But we also have animation. And why do we have animation? Because if I move it, if I hit the keys really fast, you'll see it just pop into place, right? If I do that, it's much harder to see what just happened if I just suddenly go bam, like that. In fact, our first approach, it was like that, bam. And I was like, guys, we got to move it, we got to animate it. And they're like, no, it's impossible, we can't do it, you're crazy. And I kept pushing, and we finally did it. And that's what it looks like. And then, Apple came out with all their smooth little animation, and I was like, see guys, I told you, but actually by that time everybody knew it was the right way to do it, right? Because you see what's happening. In fact, even look at this is fun. See the cursor, the comma? Look at how that moves too, right along the way, when it needs to, right? So it's a nice little smooth UI. And that uses, I think that does not use acceleration and deceleration. Oh wait, does it? Yeah, it does. It's hard to see it. There, you can see it right there. See how it jumps across and then slowly comes in? Boom, like that. All right, so I just hit escape to get out of that. All right, so that's animation. So it's good, especially when you're moving things, to actually animate the movement. And I'm thinking, I want to take a break here soon. I'm wondering if we should take a break right about now. You guys feel like a break is good now? All right, we're right in the middle of the section, but we'll take a break and we'll pick it up in want to do it in what, 10 minutes? Is 10 minutes okay? All right, so let's do it it's actually about 11 minutes. So about 1:35, I'll start talking again. Okay? So we just finished motion animation, we took a break, and we'll get right back in. So this is one of my favorite slides, because it's this crazy thing I discovered that I did not invent, but I saw somebody else using this, and I was like, oh my God, it's genius. And the challenge is this: we want to highlight code or text on a page. How do we do that? Well, one way is to dim everything down and just increase the contrast of the text you want to highlight, right? Imagine everything dim and just the word body is black on white. But that's kind of expensive to do sometimes, right? In terms of performance, if you have a large screen, you're doing a whole bunch of stuff, that might be something you don't want to do. Also, it makes the rest of the code harder to read. Another way is to change the background color, which is a favorite of the Visual Studio team. They'll do that all the time, right? You'll see that in the code. You'll see the background goes gray or something like that to show all the different identifiers that are the same. The problem with that is you're actually lowering the contrast rather than increasing the contrast of the most important item. What you are increasing the contrast you're increasing the contrast of the background of it against the other background, which does make it easier to spot. And then the other way is this, which I love. What we're doing is we're putting a hard, high contrast line around the piece we want to highlight, and then we're fading it out. And it gives you the illusion that it's actually brighter. But I've not invented a darker color than black or a brighter color than white. I'm just using white and black there, and they are the same as everything else, but they effectively get your eyes in. And then I also do something slightly similar here, where I have dark, hard, high contrast line here, and then it softens up as it goes away. And just different ways of highlighting. And you can use gradients incredibly effectively in this manner. It's one of my favorite uses for gradients. It's actually on purpose and effective. And later, by the way, we have a section called It's All Relative, where we talk about illusions like this and why these things exist, which are kind of fun. Shadow is great for floating UI elements. This was some UI we wrote a while ago, and one of my developers asked, hey, should we put a shadow underneath that? And I was like, oh yeah, that might be what's wrong with it. And I put a shadow underneath it and look at it, and I go, yeah, that was the problem. Because look at this. See this sharp edge right here? Your eyes are right here, right? I want to be up inside the box to read the hint, but what's happening instead is my eyes are right there on the top where the letters are cut off. That unnatural cropping creates something that is catching my eyes, and my eyes it's fighting for my attention right under here. Okay? Whereas when I have the shadow, I don't have the problem anymore. The problem goes away. And now I can also see that this and this and this are all related because they're all up one level. Okay? By the way, this is my least favorite new feature of Windows 8 is they got rid of all the shadows on the windows. And I'm like, what? Because I think, you know, they're talking about, I don't know why they did that, but it's like, I think they were talking about, you know, flattening the UI, whatever, because that's a good thing to do. But they took away the shadows, which for me, I was like, wait, how do I tell if I want to click on an inactive window that's got a gray border or whatever against another inactive window behind it that's got a gray border as well? How do I tell really where that is? My eyes have to narrow in, zoom in. I have to put on the glasses. I have to, you know, really focus and concentrate to hit it. So shadows make that easier to see. Here's an example of crossing lines where I found shadows were effective as well so that people could follow the lines. I have these lines that are crossing each other and I wanted people to be able to see them, so I actually put a shadow underneath and even made the lines a little 3D-ish so they had their own contrast when overlapping. So similar lines overlapping would be easy to follow. Okay? Text. Which font is most readable? And so you've got lots of different choices for fonts: serif, sans serif, fixed pitch, variable width, and those kinds of things. Here's a font comparison right here on the left. You've got a serif font, and on the right you've got a sans serif font. And I imagine most of you probably know this by now. I think most developers know this. Whoops, I lost my pretty highlighting right there. There's the, those are the serifs right there on the edges there. And so just got a couple comparisons in here. And as the font drops, you can get a sense of which you find and like and prefer in terms of which is more readable. And the reason I bring this up is because, you know, it used to be that when they're talking about computer design, computer interface design, that they would say, hey, you know, don't use serif fonts because they're harder to read. The small pixels are harder to represent. Those curves are harder to represent at smaller fonts. And they would, and then the advice would also say, well, serif fonts are okay for titles, something big. So that's kind of what the current advice is. And then the question I have out here on the slide is, but does this advice still hold true today? And let's look at what's happening to display resolution. Well, it's reasonable to conclude that the resolution is increasing. Actually, I say display resolution, but I think there's another thing that's also important, which is density, display density. Display resolution increasing. Well, here let's go in and we'll look at this in terms of what's happening with the display resolution. So this is from 2000 to 2012. You can see what's happening with regard to browser display resolution. Although I'm also seeing stuff that's showing that things are going back down with mobile devices, right, becoming more popular to browse the web. However, even mobile devices are still like around 1024 by 768 range. So at any rate, here's what's happening. More and more people are getting bigger machines, at least is what is happening up to about 2012. And then what's up with this Retina display thing? So what's going on here? And this is, you know, a quote from the late Steve Jobs, and he says, it turns out there's a magic number, and this magic number is 300 pixels per inch when the device is 10 to 12 inches away from your face. So Retina display changes, the density changes for what qualifies for Retina display depending on the distance of the device. So like a mobile device, we might hold about 10 to 12 inches from our face, whereas a monitor might be about 20 inches from our face. Okay? Or a big screen TV might be 6 feet from our face. Okay? So Retina display changes depending on distance from eyes. Okay? But what it is when it's at that distance, when you're at that distance and at that density, the human eye cannot see pixels. It cannot differentiate, cannot see a square pixel on the screen. Best font advice. So, so what I would suggest is, because there's still such a few number of machines that are at Retina display, what we want to do is we want to still go with sans serif fonts and use those. However, I think this is all changing. In the next 5 years, I think Retina displays are going to be predominantly all over the place. That's what's going to be used. And in that case, you can use serif fonts again, and the rules of print will apply to displays. Right? The rules of print, which is that a serif font is easier to read. And the reason why, I gloss over it, but the reason why is because the pieces on the edges guide your eyes along the direction that you're moving. So does anybody know what word this is that I've kind of blocked out on the screen? Can anybody tell me what word this is? What do you think it is?
Sample.
Shape? Sample? Anybody else? What? Skype? Okay. So what about this word? Whoa, that was much faster. That's interesting. That's what it was. It was shape. Okay? And this kind of gets to how we read. And there's been a number of studies in terms of how we see and read words. And one of the theories is we identify words by the shape of the word. We don't actually look at the individual letters. We look at the shape. And if we have all uppercase, we essentially have a rectangular shape. But if we have less than that, here, let me go back to here. We have clues in terms of what it is, right? So you might want to read this to yourself.
Your spell checker is broken.
Yeah, I disabled it. This is because the human mind does not read every individual letter by itself, but the word as a whole. That's right, the rod as a woolholly, right? So that's how we read. We read by shape. So yeah, if you have a lot of text all over the place, I would not do uppercase. By the way, how many people remember, like, saying I agree to a whole bunch of text in all uppercase, right? In the license agreements, right? It's absolutely wrong. If you don't want somebody to read your license agreement, you make it all uppercase. Okay, you give it a tiny window, force them to scroll up and down, give them a big fat I agree button, and that's where you put all your dark secrets, because nobody, only a few people are going to read those. So yeah, uppercase is not happy for me. So contrast makes text easier to read. So here I have two examples. Contrast by size is one thing you can do. You can do contrast by color to make it easier to read, and you can do contrast by shape to make it easier to read. In other words, the contrast here, there's not much. These are all rectangles, and this one, these are not. It's easier to read if we have greater contrast. The problem with all caps is that every word forms the shape of a rectangle. That's the problem with all caps. Okay? So when can I use, oh my God, I was in here, and this guy, look at this. I'm in a grocery store, I'm like, what? Seriously? Canned dry soup? It's like, it doesn't make sense to me at all. It's all uppercase. It would be so much easier to read if they had lowercase letters. So when can I use all caps? On logos and acronyms. That's when I give you permission to do that. And everywhere else, I would be very careful about it. Right? If you have a product name, you want to make it all caps, okay, fine. But just be very careful, because it's like, by the way, the reason I think it's used by trolls, right, when you're flaming, is because it's actually harder for us to read and slower for us to read. It makes us a little angrier when we read it, right? It's kind of, it's become, known as shouting, right? But it takes longer to read. If you look at studies, it takes about 15% longer to read all caps text than regular title case text. All right, layout. We'll talk about borders and proximity. So border comparison. Here I have two. Which do you find easier to read? The one on the right? That's the answer I want you to say. The one on the right again? That's the one I want you to say. And the one on the right again is the one I want you to say, right? And then there's the original, right? And it's like, if you want to hide data, do this, right? But if you want to show data, do that. So border thickness. Border thickness should be thin unless there's a compelling reason to make it fat. Here's an example on, I think, SurveyMonkey or something like that, where discoverability is fine, but the contrast of the border and the thickness of the border are wrong. They need to be thinner, the border needs to be thinner, or it needs to drop the contrast down, because it's fighting for all that important information. It's fighting for the attention against all that important information that's on screen. Okay, proximity. Which way to Fort Worth? So you got to look at this for a bit before you realize the right direction, right way to go, right? You're like, well, okay, it's got to be right, because if it was left, then this one would be underneath and this would be on top, right? We just switch these vertically, but you have to look at it, This is a proximity problem in terms of the UI.
Either that or every road leads to a word.
Or every word, yeah, exactly. It doesn't matter, either way. Just go straight. Okay, got the little icon, so be aware of what's going on in your head while we see this. All right, so this slide comes up in some session I'm in. I'm like, let me get a copy of that, right? I need that. So here's what we have. We have data in a pie chart and a legend. Legends are bad in general because they violate the proximity rule, which I'll tell you right now, which is objects that are closely related should be closely positioned. Contextually related objects should be close together. So here, if I want to know, for example, what's this 8% slice, that's interesting to me. What is it? I've got to move down here. Oh, there's purple. I have normal vision. I can see it. And wire transfers 8%. Oh, it's wire transfers. Okay. What's the next one? It's that 8% there. Oh, well, I'll just remember it was right here. Oh, that's accounting. Look at how I'm reading this. What am I doing? My eyes are going back and forth. I'm putting all these things in my head. Essentially, I'm digesting this in serial. Right? I'm grabbing things, I'm remembering them, and then having to use that memory. Now, contrast that with this. Now, if I want to know what is in that 8%, I just look in the 8%. It's right where it should be. And there I see everything that I need, right? The data is right there. So legends, in general, are not so good. Put the data inside the charts. So if you have a whole bunch of dangerous things, don't put it next to the save button. That's what I have here. Right? Have them far, far away. Limited screen real estate. So if we want to take lots of data and put it into a small space, so this is this is kind of the set of steps on how we could do that. So the suggestion is start with the essential data. So the most essential data is the most recent data. So you can put that down there, and then add important details. So like the start, so here we have 2000 and 2011, we see that, and here's the different pieces from the slide we saw. And then you can put the chart data back in, so we can put the span in there like that. And then you can visually connect the essential data. So I can put a little dot at the end and color code these, and do the same on this side as well. So you can see, oh, this goes from 4% to 85%, and this goes from 25% down to 14%. So I can see this, right? I'm taking all this data, I'm putting it down into 4 lines of text. And this is called a Sparkline, and it was invented by Edward Tufte, who's a brilliant graphic artist. In fact, I recommend his books. I've got a link to one of his books at the end of the session. That's a Sparkline right there. And you essentially get, it's the idea of putting graphics in line with text, right in there with text. By the way, we've introduced Sparklines, I think was it in the last release they came out, Paul? Yeah, this release we introduced Sparklines as an ability inside of our controls as well. So good things. These are some examples of Sparklines. This one's kind of interesting, this glucose one over here. So this gray line indicates normal values, and if it's outside higher contrast, it's going to be something that somebody needs to talk about or look at. A doctor needs to look at anything outside the line. Right, so here's temperature right here, and so we can see temperature popping up and spiking out. So this is a nice way of doing that. This is a proximity example right here. I can highlight the peaks and the lows right where they occur. Just put that information right there. Borders revisited. So we talked about this. This goes to the question we had in the first part of the session is, well, maybe I'm just adding too much noise. Maybe I can take it away, and you can actually take it away. If there's enough to guide you there, you don't need it. But if it stands all by itself, and another one is there, you like the one on the other side? Yeah. And you can play with it. You can drop contrast down. I think I would actually like something lower contrast than this. And just drop it down even more, but not quite down to there. That's what I would like to do. So presenting with clarity. So you want to match emphasis to information relevance. Talked about all this stuff. Use contrast, saturation, hue, lightness, opacity, shadow, size, shape, motion, animation, gradient borders, and proximity effectively. Okay, thanks everybody.
Next up, the new face of business is the web, and creating exceptional web experiences drives better business outcomes. The way to get there is to anticipate the needs of customers and employees, and then create engaging, fully customizable solutions that exceed expectations. Mehul Harry and Mark Miller will show how design is an important factor in DevExpress ASP.NET products and why performance matters to design.
The DevExpress ASP.NET set of products is wide-ranging. We offer everything from ASP.NET MVC, ASP.NET Web Forms, and even SharePoint products. From the main DevExpress website, under the Products menu, you can learn more. By clicking on ASP.NET MVC from the Products menu, you can find more about our ASP.NET products. We have over 90 ASP.NET web form controls, over 50 MVC extensions, which includes a full ASP.NET reporting suite as well as charting suite. Let's take a look at the demos. The demos are great to give you a glance at some of the power, flexibility, and beauty of these products. Now, we have these feature demos that show you things like its performance. So for example, here we have 650,000 records, and you'll see that no matter what operation takes place, it all happens within less than a second or half a second. Whether I'm grouping, paging, or even sorting. And there are actually several demos included with each installation. So for example, you can take a look at the Webmail Client, which shows off many DevExpress controls at once. For example, the grid, as well as the tree view, and even the menu and buttons. Now, we've already seen the grid. Let's take a look at some of the other controls. For example, we have a great file manager control that lets you display a file manager that you find typically on Windows as a web control. Now, this is a great way for you to expose files, but it also lets your end users upload files, and you can completely control what permissions they have access to. And you can see from these demos, there's a full set of products available, including a pivot grid, and the pivot grid is a great way for you to analyze data and display summaries on the fly. It's also able to connect to an OLAP database. And as I mentioned, we also have a full charting suite, as well as a full reporting suite. Learn more by going to devexpress.com/ASP. Okay, so we just saw a great demo of the DevExpress ASP.NET products, its performance, its flexibility, its great appearance. Now, what I want to do is show you how flexible these controls are and how you can customize their user interface. So let's get the expert from the Science of UI talk himself, Mark Miller, and see how we can make a really good user interface a great user interface by just applying some of the tips that he mentioned about noise, contrast, colors, and so forth. So Mark, here is our Webmail Client. This is one of the demos that we published. It's based on several Webmail clients like Outlook and Hotmail and Gmail and so forth. But the idea really was to showcase that you can use DevExpress ASP.NET controls like a grid view or a menu or a nav bar or a tree view into an ASP.NET site now and get great way to present your data. So what I wanted to ask you is, I love this demo. It's I love web-based email editors. I wanted to get your take on how do we make a really good UI like this even better?
Okay, well, for the purpose of this, for the purpose of answering the question, I want to focus primarily on the area of the screen where we're displaying the data that the customer is going to be looking at again and again and again. And this is one of the things that when you're working on improving UI, you always want to improve the UI that's used the most, because you can get the most gains there, the greatest benefit. And so I'm focusing on the way that we're displaying emails and how they're coming in. And there are a few things that I notice. One of the things that I notice is, for example, if you look over here on the right side, when I hover over a date, you see that there's a horizontal bar that allows me to look left to right, and I can see the contextually grouped bit of information that's all together there for that particular email. However, if you keep your eyes here in this square and I move the mouse away, what happens is we lose the horizontal bar, and now we simply have a rectangle around a number of dates and times. And the rectangle seems to indicate that these dates and times are closely contextually related. They're closely related, but when in truth, this date and time is actually more related to the email information to the left than it is to the other emails that happen to be sent on the same day. And so we have this kind of artificial grouping that's occurring here. We get that because we've lost the horizontal lines, but we've kept the vertical lines. So I would suggest either re-adding very light, low contrast, thin horizontal lines, or removing the vertical lines. So that's one of the things that stands out and I notice. Another thing is, when I look at this, when I look at, like, for example, the unread emails, the whole email line across left to right shows up in bold. And we've seen that before in other UIs. However, from my perspective, the most important piece of information is the subject. And so my suggestion is, let's try unbolding the sender and also unbolding the date, keeping only the bold for just the subject, so that if it's unread, we'll see a bold subject. If it's read, it'll simply look like what we're seeing down below. And the other thing that stands out is there's some visual noise here that's showing up. As an example, over here in front of this date, the 25th of February, we see the word date, colon, and we see the same word date down here. In fact, by the time we're down here, we know that these are all dates. In fact, we can tell they're dates from the format. We recognize them. That date format is matching my expected date format in my current locale, in which I'm viewing this. So I actually really don't need the word date colon there. We could get rid of that and maybe change it up and have a pop-up hint if anybody was really curious as to about what that piece of information meant. So we can get rid of all of this repeating word date all up and down. Similarly, over on the right side, I'm seeing what I would call visual noise in the form of data that's kind of that's kind of more data than we need. For example, if it's coming in on today, if the email was sent today, showing the full date of today isn't really that useful, because it takes a few seconds for us to parse it and recognize that, oh, that happens to be today. We could replace it with the word today, or we could just take it out completely and only show the time. And then the user, if they see just the time, they know it came in today. And otherwise, we'll specify what the date is. Similarly, for all of the rest of the dates, for all the other emails that came in this year, we could remove the 2013 and simply show, like, January 5th, for example, here for this date, or January 25th for this date, and not show the year. It just being implied that if we don't show the year, that it is this particular year. That is something that could, I think, improve usability and readability, allow us to very quickly get the information we need and show less information on screen. So those are my suggestions looking at this screen. Mehul?
Wow, okay, those are really interesting. First of all, I really like that, what you just suggested about the dates. So you remove the extra thing, because you're right, it does take a little second to parse out the date and figure out, oh, that might be today. So Mark, those are all really interesting changes, and I'm kind of excited, but I'm also excited to show you how easy it is to edit this in Visual Studio. So this Webmail Client is available as a full Visual Studio solution, and we package all our demos with full source code with each one of our installations, whether it's trial or paid. You can play around with it. We're happy for you to check them out. And you can find this, let me just quickly show you. If you're using something like Windows 8, which is what I'm using, or Windows 7, you'll find them in the public documents folder. So under C, users, public documents, you'll find the demos folder. And under DExperience demos, ASP.NET, you can pick the language that you prefer. I prefer C#, so I'll go down, and you'll find the Webmail Client. And in here is a full project, which I have loaded up in Visual Studio already. Now, in most Visual Studio projects, the first thing you want to take a look at is the default Aspx file. I should say the most ASP.NET projects, default is the root file that you'll navigate to. And this is this default page is actually inheriting from some master pages where we've got some navigational items like a tree view and a menu up at the top for the different navigational points that we have on this demo. But what I want to focus on is all the suggestions Mark's made so far deal with the grid view. And so I've got a Aspx grid view here that's called the mail grid. Now, what's great is that to modify it is really simple. So what I'll do, for example, first of all, is I'll go to the grid view and I'll click its properties, and under settings I see several options. One of them is grid lines. Now here you can see grid lines is set for vertical. Now, as Mark suggested, we can turn on both vertical and horizontal grid lines, but what I'm going to do is I like his other suggestion of just not having any grid lines at all. So I'm going to set that to none. And right below that is the group format. This defines how the group is displayed. So first it takes the name of the column and displays one of its values. So I'm going to remove the name portion and just leave the value as Mark suggested. Now, a couple of other suggestions he had tend to be a little bit more involved. So if we take a look at the Webmail Client, he suggested first of all that we change how the date is displayed. So what we want to do is change the column display. So we want to have custom display text for the cell. Now, you may be asking yourself, well, how do you figure something like that out? Well, as most developers, you may want to just look at the documentation. So I tend to go to help.devexpress.com, and I'm pretty familiar with most of the controls. But if you're not, there's a ton of great documentation here online. Everything about every property, method, and event or client side is available to you. Now, if that seems a little bit overwhelming, you could also use our search engine, which I tend to actually use a lot, search.devexpress.com, which has indexed a lot of our properties. So here, I would do something like set up ASP.NET Web Form as a technology, Aspx Grid View as a product, and then set something like display custom column text. And what it's going to do is going to search all the properties that we have and find me several examples and even customer issues that have asked similar questions, which I may benefit from as well. So here it's pointing to a documentation link on how to provide custom display text for data cells. Now, if I take a look at this, what it shows me is there is a method that it's pointing to called custom column display text. And I can see right from looking at the code that it provides me this event args object that lets me get access to not just the field name, but also its value and display text that allow me to customize exactly what I want to show. So let's do that. Let's look for, in the grid view, I'll look in the events and I'll scroll down. So there's action, client side, data, miscellaneous, and rendering. So under rendering, I see that there's already the custom column display text event that's been overridden. So let's double click that. And we see that there's already some work going on in this demo to customize the subject to from fields. So let's add our own little bit of logic here. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check to see if the current column is the date column. Next, I've got a bit of code here. Now, what this code does essentially is first I grab the current value. So if we are in the date field, I want to grab the current value and I essentially set it up into a datetime variable. I parse it as a datetime, and now I have it available as a datetime so that my calculations for the date are much easier to work with. So first I check to see, is it today's date? And if it is today's date, what I want to do, as Mark suggested, is just show the time. If it is not today's date, what I want to do is show the month and the day. Now, the datetime toString is really flexible. You can choose any types of different formats that work best for you. Now, one thing I'm not accounting for here is the year, as we'll see in a minute, but that's easy enough to add as well. So let's save this little bit here. I'll recompile. Now let's look at this in the browser. Now while that's loading, I'm going to load these up side by side. Now this demo is this demo can be run on a tablet device as well. So what happens is when we resize, it's responsive, and then what it does is it finds that if there's not enough user interface, if there's not enough screen real estate, it's going to collapse the splitter on this left-hand side and only show this items. All right, so now we can see that I've applied the change to remove the little bit of portion for date. We've changed how dates are displayed. So it shows that today's date is not shown, just the time. And I've also removed all the vertical lines. So we can see instantly from this left-handed view to the right-hand view how much Mark's suggestions tend to improve the readability. Now, one big suggestion he had was also to change the weight that some of these items are given. So he suggested we shouldn't bold the from and the date columns. Now, I will mention that this can be controlled in many different ways. So you can do it at the grid level, or you can do it at the solution level using CSS. And that's what we've done here. So if we take a look at the source view for the grid, we can see that it's got a ID of mail grid, and certain items are applied to this. So let's take a look at the styles CSS column here. I'm going to search for mail grid. And I can see there's a tag for mail grid and another tag for unread. And what it does is when it's tagged as unread, it is sent to bold. So right now what's happened is that the entire row is being tagged as unread, and therefore it's being set to bold. So what we can do is a simple, clever little hack that allows us to set only one of the columns. So what I'll do is I'll go back here to the source view, and we can do this from the design view as well. But I'm going to add a class here, CSS style and CSS class, and I'll set it to SUBJ, subject for short. And then what we'll do is that essentially we are tagging this column subject with this new CSS class that we defined. And now we'll go back to the styles, and we're going to add a little bit of code here that says apply this only when it's unread and SUBJ. So now we'll get the benefit of still using this CSS style. All right, let's save this, and let's look at it in the browser again. All right, so within a matter of minutes, we have applied very easily those great suggestions Mark had. So, all right, Mark, let me get your opinion. Now that I've applied these changes, how do they look compared to the original?
Well, I think they look good. I think we're going in the right direction. You know, one of my suggestions was, hey, let's just bold only the subject. And now that I look at it, I'm not 100% sure about this yet. I think if we bolded the subject, and then we kind of went to the next level, and then we said, well, let's kind of turn this more into kind of a card kind of display where each email is kind of a rectangle that includes subject, the from, and the date all in one enclosed kind of nice little rectangle. Then I think then it's feeling really good to me. I mean, right now it's not bad. I mean, we are definitely moving in the right direction. I love on the right column the date, the time that's showing there when the emails come in. I love the, you know, just showing the dates, just the month and the day of the year down below that. All that's good. And I think on the left, I think we effectively got rid of all the date colon pieces that are in there. I think, you know, it's cool. We're moving in the right direction. We're improving the UI, and you know, it's not a lot of work, right? It shows that not only are we talking about small changes in the UI, but we're also talking about small changes in the code and to the properties as well to support those kinds of you know, moving in the right direction.
You know, I love that suggestion as well, because the grid view, and I just got to show you this real quick.
Sorry, you're talking about the card suggestion where you're putting
the card suggestion is real interesting. It's a little bit more involved, so we'll save it for a future webinar or something. But essentially, you can have any type of layout that you'd like. So, for example, the grid view supports over 15 different templates. It's the most amount of templates that any grid view control will give you out there. But essentially, it lets you define exactly how you want your grid displayed. So in this case, somebody decided, hey, I don't want columns and rows and so forth. I want to have my own layout. I want a picture here. I want the memo field big, first name, last name. And you can see that I've still got the benefits where I can do things like sorting and so forth. But let's say I don't necessarily want to display these columns because they don't necessarily line up anymore because I've got a custom display, right? So we can create this. And what's possible, we can also get rid of the headers if we want. But I like that suggestion a lot because essentially, like you said, we can have from, to, and define a very tight, nice UI, and it's really rather easy because as I mentioned that, here, let me make this a little bit bigger so I can show you and open a pop-up window. What essentially allows you to do is in this template, we've got this data row that says, look, I can make anything I want here. If they've got a table and they've added their own columns and so forth, and we can do a similar thing as well. And so maybe we'll
back on that one that you just showed. So so just, I'm sorry, but just the way, just so that we're clear on this, in the card view that you had up, that sample, One of the things that stood out to me was first name, the words first name and last name, right? So these are clearly labels for fields that could be potentially editable on the right? Like, you know, you could type something in, for example, title, right? So my suggestion though is, and you see that kind of in a grid. So I like the card view idea, but instead of having kind of a grid at the top, I'm thinking that we would simply start the top of the card view with the subject in bold if it hasn't been read, and then right underneath the subject who it's from. And so we don't have to use the word subject, we don't have to use the word from, you just see what the subject is, you see the name of the person there, and we kind of lose some of these things that, you know, you would otherwise would be kind of a lot of noise, and you're making a move towards clarity where the essential information is really highly visible on screen. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I just want to clarify that. I just want to clarify with you that, yeah, absolutely. So, you know, and for this demo, we've just added this information in there. But essentially, yeah, you can make any type of layout. If you don't want to have first name and last name, and I wouldn't, right? I would just want to have a sort of a layout where I'm showing just the data that I want and only bolding those items. But yeah, I completely follow you, and that's what's great about the grid view. It's really kind of flexible in that way. All right, Mark, before we wrap this up, let me ask you this. Is there any other suggestions you can see, kind of like quick suggestions that would make a big impact, kind of like the ones you just suggested already that you would make for this UI?
Well, I think for a big impact, I would definitely, the next step I would do is the card view. I really think that, we're getting closer, and having that, instead of aligning the data in a horizontal line, which is kind of tends to be harder to read left to right, we've kind of put it in more of a group that's can be more compact horizontally and maybe 2 lines deep vertically. So I think that would make an impact. The other thing that just in this UI here that we're looking at, that envelope in the upper left is like screaming at me visually. It's like, it's got a bright color, it's got a high contrast border, and it's big as well. It implies that it's something that would be frequently hitting, but that's not really, I think, the case. If we go up there and click on that, you know, from a discoverability standpoint, we should see a menu pop up there. There it is right there. So you can see that it's simply for changing application. So it's not something we would use all the time. So this, I would totally lower the contrast of that. And I would do it either by, you know, you could change the icon or maybe, you know, change the opacity of it. So it's not so it uses some of the background. Some of the background comes through. So it's just not so dark, so high contrast.
I agree. And one of the things you'll notice is that in this demo, if you change around this theme to any one of the other great, wonderful DevExpress themes, you'll see that those icons tend to get updated as well. And so I just want to point out to the audience, if they are interested in changing that, you'll find those under app themes. And for example, Metropolis is the one we're looking at that had the yellow one. And you can, if I move my mouse over Sprite PNG, those icons are available. So I can open this in paint.net and, as you suggested, maybe pick something else. Now, what would you suggest changing it from and to, and how would you choose that color, Mark? Like, for example, right now it's yellow.
Right.
Yeah. What colors, you know, because, you know, developers are not, well, I should say not developers. I myself am not a designer, right? But I'm always interested in those kind of topics that catches people's eyes and says, okay, this is more friendly and so forth.
So the easy way out on this, Mehul, is to just open this file up in an image editing program, change the opacity of the layer to the 50%, and then save it right back out. And that would be the fastest way to fix this. Another way to fix it would be to grab the eyedropper, find out what the color is, change it to something closer to the white background, right? We're trying to lower the contrast, so we want to move it closer to the background color, find out that color and just fill it in. And you could kind of do a crude kind of fix there that would cover most of the things, but not the anti-aliasing. You'd have to do a color replace on the anti-aliasing pieces that you see there. But, you know, yeah, so those are the two approaches I suppose you have. The first one I would probably recommend. But, you know, I think it gets that thing of, you know, this question of what color would you choose? And with good UI, this is a kind of a truth that I've recently realized. There are thousands of right answers, but there are an infinite number of wrong answers, or very or close to an infinite number of wrong answers. So there are lots of ways to do this right, to do this so that the information is easy to read, right? In fact, you can kind of look at it by switching skins, right? Skins are different ways of presenting the information, and if they're done right, they all effectively present the information. So there are thousands of ways to get it right, but there are an infinite number of ways to get it wrong. So we, you know, as far as choosing the color here, it depends on the other things that are out there, right? We want to limit the number of colors that we're using, have it a smaller, keep the color palette low in terms of counts of different colors, because we don't want to give the appearance that there's meaningful information by showing a color when there's not, right? That's the equivalent of visual noise. So yeah, that kind of answers the question, I think.
Yeah, that was fantastic, Mark. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to try that later. You know, I'm going to maybe you'll find a good paint program and try the opacity. And they're all great tips. So I thank you very much, Mark. And I think this sample is actually better for it. Let's take a look at it again side by side.
I think so too. Thank you, Mehul. My pleasure.
And that's it for the Expressway Tour Online Edition. Thanks to Mark and Mehul. You've seen just a glimpse of what drives us here at DevExpress and some of the controls we offer. If you're interested in more in-depth training on our products, please visit devexpress.com/training to register for upcoming instructor-led events in both the US and Europe. Plus, watch tutorials and webinars covering all DevExpress products on our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching, and thanks for choosing DevExpress.